Friends and family, good morning and welcome into our podcast for Kaimana Intervention. We are debuting our podcast today, so we are very excited. And as we get started, what we wanted to do was give Dr. Taholo an opportunity to just do a little dedication to her sister. So before we roll our premiere, I'm going to turn some time over to Dr. Taholo so she can mention some things that she wanted to. So I'll turn it over to you. Go ahead, Dr. Taholo.
Thank you, Tao. In memoriam of Lisa Moanalani Katoa, on March 2nd, 1964, in San Jose, California. Lisa, yours was the first cry I heard at home from a baby the night that Mom and Dad brought you home from the hospital. I remember thinking, wow, she has a low voice and she's a baby. You were the most beautiful, shy, and humble spirit I had ever met. We were inseparable growing up. We were only 3 years apart, and you were the only sibling I had known at that time in my life. We shared a deep love that was so pure and so honest that we told each other everything and anything because we always felt safe in that knowingness. There were never any walls or defenses or pretenses. There was never a need. It was pure and unfeigned love. You later got married and had 5 beautiful children who are still on the earth today. Betty, Junior, Ane, Inoke, and Leipua. They always were and always will be your greatest treasure. They have given you precious grandchildren. Va, Lisa, named after your namesake, and baby Noke, who you took care of while you were here on the earth with us before you left. Va has also given you 2 great grandchildren, baby Ane and baby Noke. They continue, and we all continue to carry your legacy through thoughts of you during the day and through dreams of you at night. Although you suffered through unspeakable pain in your short life of 53 years, you bore your deep sorrow with such grace and such dignity that nothing on this earth could keep you from owning your own soul and keeping the gates of heaven wide open to receive one of its purest daughters and saying, Lisa Moanalani, you are home. You are home. You are home. Lisa was with me from the beginning when I was piecing the concept of Kaimana together. She was this amazing cheerleader that would quietly listen and watch for times that we could share how it was going. On October 15, 2017, she slipped away a few days before one of the dissertation defenses was to be held. She had just had her hair done to get ready to come to the defense. Lisa, we dedicate the launching of the first Kaimana Intervention podcast in memory of you, beautiful Lisa Moanalani. You always saw things through your spiritual eyes and achieved the impossible of raising 5 amazing children with relentless grace, elegant dignity, and undying love through unspeakable pain. You have now left a legacy of future generations and a family that only knows more deeply who they truly are and what they are capable of in making a positive difference in the world because of you, Lisa Moanalani Katoa. our heavenly angel. Happy birthday, Lisa. Until we meet again.
Aloha and welcome into the Kaimana Intervention Podcast. My name is Tal Harrington, and I'll be your host on this little trip that we take on the internet with my shipmates are Soa, Tau Soa Mulitalo, and Dr. Lani Taholo. And this is the Kaimana Intervention. This is our first maiden voyage, so it might be a little bit rocky. We want to welcome everybody in, and thank you for joining us. And I'll give you a little bit of an idea how this will go. We'll start out, because this is our first time on, with some brief introductions, and then we'll get a little bit deeper into where we come from, who we are, why we're doing this. But as I mentioned, my name is Tawasu Harrington, and I'll use the analogy of a canoe. I'm kind of the steersman. I just go wherever the captain tells me to go. And I just kind of help keep the canoe moving. Tausoa is our first mate, and so she kind of takes direction from our captain, which is Dr. Lani Taholo. So that's kind of the analogy that we have. And in this process, on this journey that we go on, the audience, those of you who are participating, listening in with us, you're the wind that fills the sails and powers the journey. So we're so grateful to have you on. So I'll just start out with that real quickly. But the way that this podcast will go is we're going to start out. I'm going to let Sister Soa give us our mission statement, and then I'll turn a little time over after that directly to Dr. Taholo. Let her introduce herself and give us kind of a sense of how Kaimana came to be. And then she has a statement that she'll read both at the top and at the end to close each of our podcasts. So I'll turn the time over to Soa and then to Dr. Taholo.
Thanks, Tal. So the Kaimana Intervention podcast and group curriculum offer a Kaimana wave of culturally based skills, support, and a safe space for emotional healing with generous and humble Kaimana intervention trained licensed therapists and trained cultural consultants to help others see, hear, and understand themselves, their loved ones, and even their offenders above, below, and around all the noise of the world. This is the essence of navigating through emotional healing successfully while keeping your true self intact.
I love it. Thank you. Dr. Taholo, give us a little bit of background as to how the Kaimana Intervention Program came to be. And I'm sorry, I should have given a little bit more background on your credentials. Dr. Taholo has her degree in social work and recently received her PhD from the University of Utah. And she has developed this program called Kaimana Intervention, which, as Soa just shared with us, helps to kind of navigate some of the difficult terrain or I guess should say waters that we go through in life that, that have to do with mental health and have to do with how we deal with relationships and trauma and crises. And so with that quick introduction, I'll turn the time over to Dr. Taholo to give us a little bit more background on how this program came to be and what inspired her.
Sure. Thank you, Tal. I really appreciate it. And thank you for helping us to navigate the ship. I love the analogy. And thank you, Soa, for reading our mission statement for our Kaimana intervention. First of all, I'd like to welcome everyone here. It's an honor to be here for our first Kaimana intervention podcast. And my name is Dr. Lani Taholo. And I really, in feeling honored, a lot of this has to do with helping um, address the gap that our people have been experiencing over many, many years of being able to navigate their emotions while they migrated and left their homes and resettled, and particularly here in the contiguous United States. So the issue is that there's been so many transitions um, that have been difficult, a loss of leadership, a loss of voice, a loss of sense of identity. Many things have happened. But I must say that a huge strength among our people has been the ability to acculturate rather than assimilate, meaning that they keep their traditions intact. Many of our elders have passed on the languages of our peoples to the next generations, also the traditions of the funerals and the weddings and how we hold those. And those are all things that I grew up with. So my father, Latu Inoke Katoa, is actually from Neafu Vava'u, from one of the islands there in Tonga. And my mother is Lorna Leigh Martinson Katoa, and she is from the big island of Hawaii, and she's from Waihinu, right there in South Point area on the south end of Big Island, where she grew up. She was born in Pahala and raised in Waihinu. Later relocated to Oahu on the Hawaii Kai side, went to Punahou High School. So having said that, our ancestors, the majority in my family come from Tonga and Hawaii. And also I have my maternal grandmother's full Chinese. So, and then we have Norwegian and other mixes as well. So the journey really for me has really been to look back at how we migrated. Our father, I was born in Honolulu in Hawaii, and my father landed a job with Pan American Airlines in the San Francisco airport. So we ended up coming here to the mainland, right? And settled in San Francisco. Ended up growing up there in the Bay Area, and the diversity was phenomenal in San Francisco in the 60s. So early 60s. So it was a great experience to grow up in the Bay Area of California in the early 60s. So this is when, human rights is definitely rising with Dr. Martin Luther King. And we have, John F. Kennedy is the president. And we have lots of things going on in America that starts to pay attention to civil rights. My father was quite heavily involved in the immigration process, where he started to help many relatives and people that were friends come from the islands of Tonga over into the Bay Area, and then they would either get jobs at the San Francisco airport or in other parts of the Bay Area or in California. So there was a huge influx. My mom helped him as well. And then my grandmother was forced to be reckoned with, Anaseni Takipo Tamuepao Katoa. And she raised all of us while mom and dad worked. So I saw social work at its best, just watching my father, my mother, my grandmother, many of our relatives, my uncle we grew up with, and many of our cousins in the Bay Area and families, and including Nephi Tonga, who's like our second father in our family, and all of his children. So these are all people that we flocked and hung out with, right? Our Pacific Islander people, and even went to church with, right? And this was not only in my DNA, but it became my entire eco-biopsychosocial spiritual dimensions. So it was 360. And it was such a rich experience. And my grandmother raised us going to church, Methodist in the morning, our LDS block, 3 block, and then our block, and then the Free Church of Tonga until nighttime. So we were used to going to church first thing in the morning from sun up, and we would never come home until, the crickets are chirping. So that's after we ate all day, wherever we were at. So that's just the way we were raised, and every Sunday was like that. So Sunday's consequently my favorite day of the week. I love that worshiping and that family time together, our creator. So it was really rich. And I think as time went on, and I went on my mission to the Lima, Peru North Mission, served 6 months in the jungles of Peru, right there in Iquitos, and started to understand the beauty, saw the beauty, but also saw that there was a huge lack of resources. And I thought about our own people and how we would cook food, but we didn't have a lot of money, because I noticed that like a lot of our elders were out there working. That's why my grandmother had to take over, because we had a lot of mouths to feed. We had to afford to be able to keep a roof over our head and clothes on our backs, and gas in the tanks. And the best way to do this is to work together collectively. So obviously we're a collective culture. So I knew from the time I was little, I wanted to be into something like social work. So I didn't want to waste time. I didn't want to change my direction in academics in terms of going outside of social work, except with some positive psychology classes, which I loved and literally like ate up and really internalized. So went from getting a BSW at BYU Provo, and then the master's, and then the PhD at the University of Utah here in Salt Lake City. So I would say that at that point, I knew that there had to be something created. So there's a Kaimana dissertation that's actually published in 2019, and it's in the magazine it's in a journal called ProQuest. So if you pull up University of Utah, Marriott Library, and look at ProQuest, you can actually find Kaimana, an integrative study, because there were two parts to the Kaimana intervention. Part one was we had 5 stakeholder focus groups, Pacific Islanders, ages 30 all the way up to 76, I believe it was, across the board. I mean, these were stay-at-home moms, post office worker, coaches, grandparents, everything and anything that you could even imagine and think of across the board, people that were teachers, just everyone at work coming in, beautiful conversations, recorded everything, and wanted to know, I really wanted to understand and find out what's impacting our help-seeking behavior as Pacific Islanders when it comes to mental health. And I knew that the word mental health really doesn't exist in our languages.
Yeah.
What really it translates into is our overall well-being. That's what it translates into. And then you can, carve it down a little bit to emotional well-being. But there's no such thing as mental health per se in our language. So when we talk about it with our people, we use our overall well-being, and we talk about the lokahi will, which is the balance, lokahi, balance and harmony of life. And we believe that those are made up of all, spiritual, friends and family relationships, work and school, mental and thinking with ourselves ourselves and pondering things and emotional feelings and physical and body. So that total 360 picture of emotional well-being is the way that we view mental health, if you will, because mental health is too small for our people to look at it and have its own little, big category. It's within each of these categories of our well-being. It has our people are connected to the earth. We're very much connected to Mother Nature. And so when you look at the Lokahi will and all these different parts, these 6 parts, it's all connected to different parts of nature. So what I had the opportunity to do, that was the first part. The second part was to actually it's been about 40 years now of practice in the field of social work. And I just had been compiling all of my work in terms of what worked and what didn't work with our people as an in-home therapist, and just collecting data over the years. So I put that together and called it the Kaimana group. And now it's called Kaimana Intervention Group. Did that for the second half. We got 100% graduation. My PhD chair, Dr. Rosie Hunter, began to cry when she heard that we had 100% graduation. And she said, "Lonnie, I know the data, and that doesn't happen. They don't even make it back to the first session after the initial assessment. This is unheard of. So let's keep this going." And I promised her we would do that. So since that took place in 2018, so we've been running Kaimana Intervention Groups since 2018 in the community with some church congregations, the Tongan United Methodist Church for 2 summers, a couple of summers back in 2008, and then again in 2018, and then again with different communities along the way. So it's been a great experience. This is where SOA really comes in, because she is our Kaimana intervention group coordinator, and she coordinates all of those groups that are taking place. But it's to help address and bring the Kaimana wave of resources, which is it's the intersectionality between trauma and culture. So there's a lot of shame and invalidation for our people when we experience these things. So we address that specifically within the Kaimana Intervention Group. We also address specifically in our own Pacific Islander ways of healing and processing. We address and look at the underpinnings of what we have experienced in terms of domestic violence, in terms of any kind of violence, in terms of sexual assault, sexual abuse, any kind of abuse, emotional abuse. We also look at suicidality, suicidal thoughts, any considerations towards, ending or hurting, their own lives. And so we address all of these trauma pieces. Also, we address conflict. Some people may not have had the severe trauma, but they may have had enough conflict within the culture that it has really impacted the way that they function. So in the field of therapy, you have to see if it's impacting your major roles in life, such as, are you able to concentrate on things at home with your family, in your role with your family? Are you able to concentrate in your job and in your career? Are you able to concentrate at school? Are you able to focus on these other, things that you're involved with in the community, in church, anything that you're involved with? If it's affecting you to that point where it's taking away, that conflict is taking away from your focus, your time, your energy, and your concentration, then that means you probably could use some help and some skills. So we help provide the skills to actually navigate these rough waters.
Yeah.
So that's how that came to be, and that's where we're at now. So our opening phrase that we use in terms of looking at reminders, healthy reminders to give to our listeners. We believe in the power of doing homework. So our opening and closing phrase is always ask yourself the hard questions. Do your homework and apply it with an open mind and heart. And don't forget to move out of your own way as you witness yourself growing, because you will grow. That's the end of it. But our premise for this is that you and our, basically we're saying, if you will do your homework and ask the hard questions and attend Kaimana with an open heart and an open mind, at least to see how this could be helpful to you, if you've considered and thought that you've gone or experienced any of these things we're talking about. We believe that you will grow if you are asking good questions and you're doing your homework, because we have homework at the end of every session. It comprises, there's 13 sessions to graduate from a Kaimana intervention group class. So that's the history behind it. I hope that was helpful.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much, Dr. Taholo, for giving us that background. There's so much. I want to just go back. I really, a podcast is a very interesting medium, that takes a little getting used to, and it takes, like, you kind of find your voice, find a rhythm, and it's very organic. And so for those of you who are joining us, that should be the expectation, that these discussions will be very organic. My role at times will be, like, if Dr. Taholo gets too technical, then I'll ask her questions like, what does that actually mean in, like, terms that we're familiar with. But I love one of the things I love that you talked about, and I think that people who are listening, as they're listening to your story and your dad and the community, and everybody knew a family that was like your family, that everybody went to, like your dad helped people with their immigration papers or whatever and help them get assimilated. I love the word you use, acculturate instead of assimilate. That's a very interesting thing that we do retain our culture in the process of integrating ourselves into to this new place that we are. But I'm very hopeful and I think very confident that there are people that are going to be listening to your story and can relate to it, can say, like, oh, I know a family like that, or that was my family. That's exactly how my life was. And this podcast is for you, for the people who, as we tell these stories, that you can relate to it. And I think that there's a lot of us. I love how you just talked about, because I've heard this before, that the person that oversaw your doctorate, she said, like, this is an amazing accomplishment, 100% graduation. Usually people go to one session and they never come back. And as people are listening to just that description, who have sought help, and they went to a session of therapy and they came away going, that didn't work. This is for you. And as you're describing it, I want people to understand that the Kaimana intervention program is an actual program. And like you mentioned, SOA is an integral part of leading these groups and having these discussions. And there is homework and there is a workbook that you go through and you address these things. And like, as you were talking about the things that you talk about, I'm thinking in my mind, those are all the taboo things in our culture that we don't talk about, and this is, I think you recognize that, hey, we need to talk about this stuff, And so maybe I'll ask this question for you or for Soa, either one or you, both of you. Like, who is this program for? I think, well, one of the things, let me lead by saying this, that you identified, there's obviously been lots of research done on mental health, you know? So if mental health was this kind of blanket solution that you got, okay, this is the answers for this type of trauma, then we would have the answers. But I think what you recognize, Dr. Taholo, and I'll let you elaborate here, is that nobody had ever done any research on this specific demographic. And when we talk about Pacific Islanders, that actually, as you mentioned when you were in the jungles on your mission, any group that lives kind of in a tribal type of and a village type of a structure, a societal structure, has very similar things that go on, and that they kind of internalize but don't talk about, and so the Western medicine has developed their own solutions for some of these mental health issues. But I think what you're saying is that you recognize that wasn't enough, or wasn't even touching what the needs were for a specific group that's very dear to you, that you're a part of. Is that how you describe it?
Yes, that's absolutely correct. And someone knows this, that, you know, if you were to do a deep dive in the literature, in terms of Pacific Islander interventions for our own people, there's things like Talanoa. Yeah, if you go to New Zealand and you look at their literature, and you look in University of Hawaii and you look at this literature, and that's where a lot of the literature will come from in terms of doing a lit review. So that's part of the PhD program, is you have to do 100 years worth of lit review to really know what was offered in the past, and not duplicate any of those pieces, and for sure not plagiarize anybody. So the issue was to really find something that would be an intervention specifically tailored for our people, and also for Indigenous consideration, because many of our Indigenous populations are collective cultures.
Yeah.
We do for each other, and we do it in teams, we do it as villages, we do it as families, we do it as groups. And what I wanted to make sure that we were addressing in the Kaimana intervention group was that we were addressing not losing the me in the we, because it's so easy to lose yourself in this collective world, that you're then wondering, you know, when you start to notice other people definitely use their voices. And typically in our culture, it's not until you become one of the elders, or you're like the oldest auntie, or, you know, to be the fahu, or, you know, it's a role or a position. So what we don't want to do is wait years down the road until we're in one of those positions to actually navigate this and use our voices in ways that serve ourselves, and also serve our people and our family. And there's a way to do it, like I've talked about this before, without throwing the baby out with the bathwater. So there's ways to do this and get the best of both worlds. And that's what Kaimana intervention is about, is to keep yourself intact. That's at the very end of the mission statement that we have, that Soa just read for the Kaimana intervention mission, is to keep your true self intact and utilize, why not utilize all the deep, beautiful cultural healing that's here and available, that also, you know, came from our ancestors, that we somehow in that, you know, coming across and migrating, right, the diaspora and coming over, let's not lose the beauty and the strength of our people and who we are. So definitely have your voice, but you can do that in an interdependent way. So we're super excited because we have a Pacific Islander artist that's also helping us with as we get our book out on the Kaimana intervention manual. to actually have a Pacific Islander artist put together this very conversation that we're talking about, not losing the me in the we.
Mhm.
And so there's going to be a continuum that talks about when we're so lost in that collectivism that we become so codependent that we lose our voices. And then there's the other part where we do avoidant isolation to such an extreme that we don't go to any more of the funerals or the weddings or anything. But man, 10 years down the road, I might do a second mortgage on my house because I want to compensate, and I'm overcompensating for all the funerals and the weddings and stuff that I missed. So there's these patterns, right, that happen within our culture, and it's finding that balance, which is called interdependence.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where we come in with the Kaimana intervention. And I think as we move forward and we have this painting ready, and we have this published, I'm going to be super excited for us to share all of this. And it's all Pacific Islander cultural, healing and processes. And then we invite other Indigenous populations to consider looking at Kaimana intervention as well, so that they can look at the strengths of their own cultures, their Indigenous cultures as well.
I love the kind of just the description of the way that the program works. One of the things, as you're talking, telling your story and explaining what this is all about, I'm just thinking, I know there are people that have been looking for this, for somebody who is telling this story. They're like, I totally get that. Like, now I don't even go to funerals anymore. Or every time somebody, there's a funeral or a wedding, it breaks the bank and I don't know how to deal with it, to the point where now I don't even want to go. I mean, if you feel like that, you're not alone. I mean, there are a lot of, that's what this place is for us to discuss this. And it's not an either or thing. When you talk about this interdependent place where these things can coexist, I think that we get this idea that I got to do one or the other. I can't, and I can't express how I feel because, it's not appropriate or something like that. And then there's one other thing that I'm going to try and bring Soa in here to talk a little bit about. It's often with our people that you don't get a chance to have your voice until you're older. And I what I hear you saying is, no, we need to find our voice now. And so let me ask you to kind of just at what point in your life do you think people should start to address these things and figure this stuff out? And like you've run a number of these group sessions all the way through. So you don't have to get into detail, obviously, for privacy, but who do you see that is coming and really, really benefiting from this program?
Right now, we are working with mainly adults, but I have to say that a lot of what our adults are saying is the trauma that they have dealt with is mostly in their childhood, and it has affected them all throughout their life. And so when it comes to our youth, that's where I am really concerned, because that was my interest in my research as well. Is that's how I got on board with Lani, was I did my research on youth and depression and suicide. And what I'm hearing our adults saying today is what our youth are being faced with in real time right now. And so what I would say to your question, Tao, with who is this for? I would say this is for everybody and anybody that has a culture. I know Lani had said that, Indigenous people are welcome, and those that who have collective cultures are as well. But I've noticed that with the concepts that Kaimana teaches, with the skills it has, it helps us to navigate through our multiple identities. And so that's what I mean by anyone that has a culture, because we have an identity and a culture within not just our, ethnicity, but also our religion, also with our age. There's social norms within everything, and rules that construct us and affects how we behave. And so that's why I love Kaimana so much, because it's not just about, for me, it's not just about my PI identity, my Pacific Islander identity, but also how do I navigate it as I experience it as a American? Because when I was in school, to them, I wasn't American. I was Polynesian. But when I go to, church or to other social functions with my my Samoan family, because I don't speak the language, or don't do the Fa Samoa things, I was also not Samoan enough. So, it's just trying to find that. And that's what Kaimana did for me. And also the feedback that I get from our participants now. And so, yeah, I hope that helps.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Because again, going back to this idea, I think that there's people that are listening that they're like relieved, like, well, I'm not the only one that feels that way. And there is a place for me. So talk a little bit more, Dr. Taholo, just maybe if there's some other things that you would mention, like who is this for? And then how do you get involved? Like if you like are listening, go, yeah, that's for me. Then how do you get involved? But first, like, as you see it, as you have developed it, who is this for, Dr. Taholo?
I definitely developed it with our Pacific Islander people in mind, but I also thought about the other indigenous populations. I also love what Soa talked about, because specifically in what's in the dissertation, the Kaimana dissertation, and is in part of the manual, is the in-betweenness that we feel. And that's what Soa's referring to.
Yeah.
And so anybody that's feeling that in-betweenness, right? In between culture, in between lifestyles, in between any of these social constructs, they can relate to it. So I want to say for sure, we would never turn anybody away. Anyone that's interested is welcome. Anyone that comes in peace is welcome. That's always been the way that we have functioned at our agency, Child and Family Empowerment Services, which is the first agency that my husband Benny Taholo and I began back in 2003, and is still going. And so anyone that comes in peace is welcome. Same premise for Kaimana as well. The issue is I don't want anyone to be disappointed if they come in and they see that, wow, this is really, highly culturally based in terms of the nuances and the words that we use. Absolutely. But if the person is open to it and they can understand it from what they're going through in terms of conflict with any of these constructs that So I was mentioning, and that I'm talking about from being in that in-betweenness world, absolutely you're welcome to come in and join. And so what we're working on next is really striving to shift this, because we have had the experience of already utilizing the whole Kaimana intervention with a congregation. So there were grandparents, parents, aunties, uncles, cousins, all the youth were there, and it worked just fine. And so what we want to do is make sure that we're being really smart in terms of, if we do hold these for the youth, that it's very, there's so much in the material, it's really rich, but we want to make sure that it's very youth focused, right? And the issues that they're going through as kind of in this in-betweenness world, right? Yeah. And also, to really take a look at, at some point, families, because one of the things that the Western culture has not been able to do as well is really handle family therapy, so to speak, that in a culturally responsive manner. That's a huge gap right now. I can tell you that right now because my training is in family therapy as well. And with all the wonderful models that exist, it's just that when it comes to certain cultures and talking about that in-betweenness, it has all these added on layers that many of these models, I mean, you can address it, but you really, it goes beyond addressing it. And that's why we wanted to have Kaimana created, was because we want to have an intervention that actually intervenes in ways that make sense to the people that you're serving. We've had so many Pacific Islanders go to court-ordered anger management. You know, you're going to go to this class and you're going to graduate, and then, you know, then we'll let you, you know, give you some time off of your, you know, your court fees, or, you know, shave off some of the, you know, state jail time, blah, blah, blah. I mean, we've worked with, like I said, this is our 40th year this year, 2022. So we've been in and out of juvenile court and also district court for many years and working with many families. So we're familiar with that process. So, and also with juvenile justice and DCFS. So the issue is to really speak in ways that the people you're serving can relate to. So we can't just go in there and do a Western culture intervention and think that that's going to make any sense to them. Because I had many of these same folks go to these classes that were court ordered, not just anger management, but any other kind of parenting classes, many of them parenting classes, and come out and say, okay, I understand. I'm, you know, they're very intelligent. People are very intelligent. That's not the issue. But in terms of being able to relate, they came out of there saying, I couldn't even relate to what they were saying. So if you can't relate, then you can't connect the dots.
You can't apply it.
And that means that you can't apply it in ways that are effective and long term. So it's really crucial and critical to be able to have a curriculum that actually addresses the worldview of the people that you are serving. Then we're speaking the same language. Then we're connecting the dots. Then the homework makes sense because we give homework at the end of every session, like I said earlier. So that's really where the rubber meets the road. And when people do their homework and they ask good questions and they come back and they go, oh man, I did the homework and this is what, you know, came to my heart and to my mind. Like, I'm wondering, like, is this part of what's going on? Well, hey, let's talk about it. But they get excited because they can relate now and they can connect the dots and they can make real changes that they've been wanting to make for in some cases, like for generations. So,
I love, you know, part of what you're talking about is, you know, I think when people talk about an intervention and you talk about like a Samoan family or a Tongan family, Polynesian family, and you're talking about, well, you're going to go and you're going to tell your mom and dad that this is how I feel. And you're like, nah, that's not going to, you know, it's like, that's not how it works. Right. And so what I think that part of what this program provides is a path to that conversation, but in a way that makes sense, like, you know, in a way where we're all kind of coming together. And I think part of what needs to be said is that that the program is segmented in such a way that it's safe, so that, you know, if youth are talking about stuff, you don't have to talk about it when somebody's in the room that's going to get mad, right?
Yes,
you know, and so there's a safe place that you can talk about this stuff, and you work your way, you know, to the place where we can talk about it. But there's a process there. But one of the words that came to my mind as you're talking about it, as you were talking, is paradigm. People talk about paradigm shifts. Sometimes I don't know exactly what that means, but how would you describe, like, is there a paradigm shift or change the paradigm? How would you describe what we're trying to do? And maybe can you define what is a paradigm? Sometimes for me, I'm like, well, okay, I think I get the idea of what that means, but what exactly does it mean?
Okay. Well, within this context, let me help explain. So what we were just talking about was I was presenting that there's a worldview.
Yeah.
Now, our worldview, each of us have a worldview. These worldviews take place at very young ages. Now, in the Kaimana dissertation, way before Pacific Islander babies learn how to talk and walk, they are already picking up in all their sensory system the exchange between families. Babies are already picking up gestures and what the faces of their caretakers look like and their siblings and their grandparents and their aunties and uncles. They're paying attention to all these things. These are called cultural signs. So there's a whole section in the Kaimana dissertation that talks about cultural sign development with our people way before we start talking and walking developmentally, right? And our brains are still developing as well. So that worldview begins to take place where we start to say, this means that means this. And I'm starting to create my own thesaurus, if you will, and my own dictionary of this plus this equals that. Now, the issue is that we start to create screens when we come upon situations, and those screens come from years of practice and years of experience, right? If every single time I do something that brings shame, I start to build an emotional screen that says, if I do that certain thing and bring shame to my family, I'm already putting on a screen. That's a paradigm. I'm already beginning to view things a certain way through my screen. What we are saying here in the Kaimana intervention is some of the definitions that we have created in our own worldview thesaurus and dictionary need, if we haven't come at this with an open mind and an open heart, need to be malleable enough that we can change some of those symbols and some of those meanings. So that not every single time that I'm talking about going off to school, instead of staying home and taking care of all my siblings who are a lot younger than I am, for example, which is my duty, but I don't want to bring it up to mom and dad or my grandparents or my aunties and uncles because it's going to bring shame, meaning
or guilt,
guilt, right?
Yeah.
And I don't want to do that. And yes, I could bring the name up, but in the family, right, the status, if I go out and I get my degree, but there's always something attached to it, especially with our culture. We always have to take our family in with our own thoughts and our own considerations.
That whole we and me thing.
And so we have to be able to tease out the information so that we can begin to say, oh, so typically in the past, I've always thought that if I just keep my mouth shut and I don't say anything, that, it's all going to work out somehow. Well, over time, what we call that is just really sticking to a place where we talk about over appeasement. We just appease, and we're pleasing everyone.
Yeah.
Or we're just over here isolate, and we avoid. They're both forms of avoidance, but one is to tend to people please, and the other one tends to, isolate. So the critical piece is to start to open and broaden our view, if you will, broaden that worldview, broaden our thesaurus that we've internalized, and find out that there are other ways of handling and navigating
Mhm.
through situations. And it doesn't always have to be painful. And that's like a new concept for some people that we've worked with. That in many of our people that we've served, their world has been, but that's always a painful process.
Yeah.
And what we need to do is say there are safe ways to do this. And we're not saying it's always going to be easy, but it doesn't always have to be painful right off the chute, right out of the chute, as soon as you
Mhm.
start doing it. If you have a plan, and if
Yeah.
you have a way to practice it. So we practice in the Kaimana groups. We process, we practice, and it's all a safe space. There's high levels of confidentiality. Everyone has to agree to that, sign paperwork for that. The facilitators that are trained, SOA, and all of those that are helping her to co-facilitate, and our therapists, they know. And so it's really allowing ourselves to be less rigid and to become more flexible
Mhm.
in terms of how we respond
Yeah.
to these things and how we view them.
Yeah. Yeah. I love just you explaining that. Like, I feel a sense of relief within myself that, oh, there are answers out there, and I'm kind of hoping that I am channeling or sharing feelings of anybody else that is listening to this, and that I hope as you listen you feel some sense of relief that, oh, there is a place, there is an answer, and there are people who have a similar story to mine. There are people that have this a similar, like, how can I be a part of this world or that world, instead of how can I be a part of create my own world that joins the two, that you have this that like you said, that interdependent, that intersectional place that is you.
Mhm.
And that is, and I think so many, and I'm gonna give a little bit of time again to Soa to just talk about like the things that people are going through. But like, what is your favorite kind of aha, Soa, that you see as people come in? Is it what is the first realization that when you see that you go, okay, we're on the right track? Does that make sense, the question?
I think because it's a process, the real big aha moment is always at the end with the feedback, to be honest, because a lot of them, this is all new. This is all new to them, that we're actually putting words to what they're feeling, to what they're experiencing. And so it's a lot of hard work and a lot of new work to grasp. And so I would say what you're saying, like when they're finally understanding, is at graduation or even after. Even while I'm doing my training with previous members that participated in the Kaimana groups, they're still learning about themselves. And I think one of the participants in this training said it beautifully, is that it's helping them to recognize and accept all parts of themselves. Because like I said, with Lonnie was saying, that in between this is like we have these different layers of culture and identity, and we tend to try and separate them. But what Kaimana does and what it's doing for our participants today is it's bringing it all together and helping us to really confront ourselves and really be okay with ourselves. And I think that's exactly what the mission statement is saying.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, I love that, because I think part of what we might feel like is that we're incomplete because we don't have like the Fa Samoa part, or we don't have the Western, American, the Palangi part. And so like we feel like we're incomplete. And I think what this program shows us is that no, you can be complete. there doesn't have to be a void in your life, because you are and you are this beautiful combination of those things. And you don't have to reject or or deny yourself something that you want to be a part of, because of what you think the consequences may be. It's getting to that comfortable place. But I love one of the things you said, so is that you're helping give words to thoughts and feelings that they already have. And I think that there's a lot of comfort in that. I come from the addiction and recovery side of things, as far as how I relate to things as an opiate addict and alcoholic that's in long-term recovery. One of the things that was so refreshing to me, or so liberating to me, was to know that I was not alone. Because when you're living the life that you live in that in-between place, like, I can totally relate to that. But you don't really think that other people are going through that. So to have a place where you can go and people, they start talking about that, and there's actually a word for it. You thought it was just, oh, I'm crazy, but it's like, there's a word for what you're going through. That in and of itself, I think there's so much growth that happens there in being able to say, oh, that's a thing. Okay. And we can talk about it, so anyway, I wanted to just kind of wrap this session up. Lonnie, why don't you, or Dr. Taholo, just give us kind of a closing, like, hope for what this podcast will be. And this is one of many sessions that we'll have. We will have guests on, and we'll talk about these things, and we'll talk about all kinds of issues. But what is your hope and your dream for what this podcast will be, Dr. Taholo?
Really, the hope is just like what the mission is. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm also going to read the vision of this Kaimana Intervention podcast and this work, because there's a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
And the vision is where culturally based skills for emotional healing and unrivaled vulnerability meet. And therein lies the threads of emotional healing. What we're trying to say is this is to be a podcast where we invite you to bring yourself. When you are ready for something to consider, like the Kaimana group, and you're learning from the podcast and you end up going to group, bring your unrivaled vulnerability. Bring yourself, your open mind and your open heart, because that, coupled with the Kaimana wave of culturally based emotional skills, with a safe space and with this wave of support, you will be well on your way to intentional living and intentional healing. And that's what this is about. This is all coming from a place of I'll call it this, effective love. I know it's one thing to love, but I think it's really powerful when we can love effectively in ways that actually are meaningful and work and connect all the dots.
Yeah.
So that's what we're hoping and praying for in this, and that that it's a user-friendly place for people to be able to not feel judged ever, but to feel that this is a safe place to be able to check things out. Whether we agree or not, that's okay. I'm okay with that. That's just how life is. The issue is that we feel that we have a mission to accomplish and a vision, and we want to be able to share it with whoever is willing to receive it. It's an open invitation, so that's what we hope for.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. We welcome everyone aboard the canoe as we go on this journey, and so grateful to be on it with you. You can find us at kaimanaintervention.com. We have a YouTube channel. We have a Facebook page at Kaimana Intervention, and there are places that you can find out more information. If you want to get involved with Kaimana, the Kaimana Intervention group, the website kaimanaintervention.com is probably one of the best places to go right now. But we will continue to do these podcasts, and I love the things that Dr. Taholo just described. There's a bunch of stuff in there that, to me, like, I'm still trying to figure that out. And what I want to do is invite people to come and join us, and we will figure out exactly what Dr. Taholo is talking about when she's talking about this wave of resources and these cultural skills and all of this stuff. That's what we will spend our time kind of discussing and discovering together. And that's what this journey is all about. So I'll let you sign us off, Dr. Taholo. Go ahead.
Okay, great. So again, in closing, for our Kaimana intervention team here for our podcast, again, in closing, always ask yourself the hard questions. Do your homework, apply it with an open mind and heart, and don't forget to move out of your own way as you witness yourself grow. Mahalo.
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 Okay, thank you, everyone. We'll see you again next time. So
Thank
far, so
you.
far.